My question is for Destiny and 2 points of context. Since '91, with the fall of communism, all but 3 of the Soviet, or former Soviet republics, have had skyrocketing Human Development Index. So let's take this as a proxy for quality of life. The 3 exceptions are obviously Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine. This is a good argument for these people have suffered tyranny and violence at the hands of their states. So in 2014, so that's the first point. Second, in 2014, Igor Kolomoisky ran for president of Ukraine on a platform of let's expropriate and deport the Russians, if not more violence. He got 0.5% of the vote and was humiliated. He then financed the now Zelensky regime under his ownership of 1+1 media, spread propaganda against Russians, which probably flared some of the ethnic tensions we now see. Based on these 2 points, one can claim 2 things. First, the current regime in Kiev is evil. And second point, all of the previous regimes in the Ukraine, as well as the one in Belarus and Russia, are likewise evil for precisely the same reasons. They make the lives of their subjects, let's call them that, that's how they see it, worse. How are these regimes not evil, Destiny?
I think that control of media in Ukraine, I haven't gotten to dive into this in a conversation with anybody because it's one, not many people talk about it, and 2, it's a pretty complicated issue. I had a friend that was, I had a big debate with Fuentes on this, and we talked briefly about it, but there's like a huge history in Ukraine, I say history, but between like 91 and 2014, there have been a lot of different like oligarchs that control different radio stations that have been vying for getting their particular propaganda on the airwaves, supporting different factions. I've heard, for instance, that, so people talk about how Ukraine is trying to push the Russian language out of, or the Ukrainian leadership is trying to push the Russian language out of a lot of Ukraine. And the reasons why I've heard for that is because especially in places like in Crimea, there's a lot of Russian propaganda that's, streamed across the radio waves in the Russian language. I've heard that in earlier regimes, part of the reasons why some of the far-right parties were able to get as strong as they were is because part of the regime leadership was trying to get those people to be more powerful via spreading propaganda on the radio in order to split the votes between other like opposition parties. I can't give you like a full breakdown, in-depth history on it because it's very complicated and because it just hasn't come up in a conversation, so I haven't studied that well. But I would say that if you're interested in propaganda that exists in Ukraine, there is like a very huge and rich history of different people like fighting like viciously over those airwaves to push, different propaganda in one direction or another. In terms of trying to answer your question, how does that make any particular party evil or good? I will say that we're a little bit spoiled in the West sometimes and that we don't have to think about it in necessarily the same framing. But when you're in a country where there are foreign powers that are leaning very heavily on your media, and when you have like strange oligarchs that exist in your country that are leaning very heavily on the media, it's hard to just come out and say like, you're evil for engaging in this type of propaganda when like everybody else does it too. I guess I say we're spoiled in the West, but arguably we would complain in the West that it happens here too, even ignoring Russia. People say, well, social media companies, Zuckerberg, or I guess now Elon Musk has too much power over the media. Are they evil for doing what they do? But I don't think that engaging in that level of propaganda would be enough for me to claim that a certain administration is evil or that prior administrations were evil.
That did not answer my question. The question was, considering the absolute state of these countries, while all of the former Soviet republics, their quality of life drastically improved. The case of the Ukraine, Russia, and Belarus being tyrannical as they have been, kleptocracies, if you will, this is evil, to steal people's earnings and to keep them poor artificially for the wealth of the ruling elite. That is evil. Or do you disagree with this, that stealing from people...
I think it's bad. I'm not going to defend like Ukraine one of the things that I referenced was a lot of the color revolution that was happening or a lot of the revolution that was happening in 2014, a lot of those protests, the Euromaidan protests, were because of massive corruption in Ukraine. I'm not going to defend that. I don't know if I would call calling any administration evil is like, I don't even know if I would call Russia evil. But I'm not going to say that's a good thing. I guess if you were to push me on it, I guess I would say that it's evil. But yeah, my understanding is Ukraine is one of the most corrupt countries in the world pre-2014 and even afterwards. And I don't think anybody would argue with that. There's a lot of bad stuff going on in that country.
Can I just say this to add to that, though? That's why I didn't even want to bring up contentious points about people get lost in these arguments about Burisma and Hunter Biden and whatnot. I mean, people in governments and regimes using corrupt policies in places to enrich their pockets. I mean, I don't know if you saw Nancy Pelosi's response to ending it like, Congress trading. Why wouldn't we want to trade? Well, of course you would. You've gotten rich off the backs of the American people. You've robbed us. So, and that goes across both parties, even McCarthy, et cetera. So I'm not even, taking a one side. But yeah, I think the corruption, Ukraine is a hotbed of financial money laundering and a place of corruption, specifically because of the fact that it is neither, one side or the other. It makes a perfect hotbed for lots of problems, and it wasn't just because of the U.S. or Russia. They've had a long-standing set of issues like most Eastern European countries have had, and Russia itself since the fall of the USSR.
Did you feel like I adequately answered your question?
I'm glad you agreed on the title of the debate.
Well, I'm not talking about like current.
Agree that it's evil. He claimed as well. Agreement. This is beautiful.
Okay. To say that there are like evil aspects of a country when you're talking about a conflict between two countries, you're trying to figure out like what is the right or wrong one. I don't think is the same as agreeing that there is prior corruption that exists in the country.
That was what was at stake.
So I'm going to push you on the Russia's evil comment. I'm very glad I had him right before him. This question is for Destiny. Recognizing that Ukraine and its territory from 1991 had oil reserves matching Russia's in the Siberian Peninsula. Knowing that Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus are some of the three poorest countries, at least in Eastern Europe, how is Russia not evil for stealing the region, specifically Crimea, taking these oil reserves, and starting this conflict just for that financial gain?
I'm very uncomfortable when we talk about like foreign affairs, like calling any particular side like good or evil. I think that it is a pretty one-dimensional way of looking at things. Like I'll talk about like, does somebody have like a moral right or justification or an international justification to do something? But like wholesale calling a country or an administration evil, I think is really, really difficult to do. Like maybe if we're talking about like, like Hitler or Mussolini, maybe we can go there. But even at that, I feel like just writing off like an entire body of something as like good or evil, I think is just too one-dimensional because there's so many systems involved.